Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I am so glad that you could join me for today's lesson. Today we're continuing our series of lessons on big names in the Bible, and today we're going to focus on King Solomon. Now, when we last left off, we were talking about King David. And King David's story is recorded in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. By the time we open our Bibles and turn to 1 Kings, however, David has died. And Solomon, David's son by the woman Bathsheba, is now the king over all of Israel. And under Solomon's reign, Israel expanded her influence. She became prosperous, and she was under no threats from her enemies. But at the very outset of Solomon's reign, the writer of 1 Kings tells us that Solomon went to a place called Gibeah, and there he decided he would worship the Lord. He would offer sacrifices. Now, this was before the temple was built in the city of Jerusalem. There was no central place to worship God then. Instead, there were all these other places where people would go periodically and offer sacrifice and worship God. One of those places was Gibeah, and that's where Solomon went. As the writer of 1 Samuel tells us, God was very, very pleased with Solomon. And so God showed up and appeared before Solomon and said this, "Solomon, you're doing a great job as king, and I want you to know that I am willing to give you whatever you ask. You just name it, and I'll give it to you." Well, Solomon had to think about that for a while. And as he did, he realized that being king was a very, very hard job. There were all different kinds of people to look after, and the job carried a lot of responsibility. As king, Solomon had to try to do his best to make sure that his people were well cared for, that they were able to live peaceably, that there were no bad things that were going to happen to them. And so as Solomon thought about all of that responsibility being king, he went back to God and said this, "God, I realize that being king is just tough. It's not an easy job. So here's the one thing I would ask from you. I ask, Lord, that you give me the ability to understand my people, to know what they need, to understand what their lives are like. And I also ask that you would give me the ability to know good from evil, to be able to tell right from wrong." In a word, Solomon asked for wisdom. Now, when God heard Solomon ask for this, God was really, really pleased. Let's imagine God clapping his hands and saying, "Wow, that's terrific." And God said to Solomon, "Because you have asked for wisdom, that is what I'm going to give you. But because you did not ask for something for yourself, I'm going to make sure that you have things for which you didn't ask. I'm going to shower your life with riches and with honor and many blessings." And so as a result of meeting God and making this request, Solomon became known as a wise king. Now, the writer of 1 Kings illustrates this for us with a story that's very, very interesting and very, very powerful. It happens right after Solomon has asked God for the gift of wisdom. As the story goes, two women lived together in a house, and both of them had baby boys about the same time. Unfortunately, one of the baby boys died. And so the two women began to fight. they began to argue over which one was the real mother of the baby boy who was still alive. They would say, "It's my child," and the other would say, "No, it's my child." And their argument became so heated and so disturbing to their neighbors that these two women eventually went to King Solomon and said, "We have a problem and we need you to help us make a decision." And King Solomon said, "Well, tell me what's going on." And so the women told their story. One of them said, "I had a baby boy." The other one said, "I had a baby boy." They were born about the same time. And one of them has died. And now we're arguing. One of the women said, "I'm the child's mother." The other one said, "No, I am the child's mother." Well, this went on back and forth for a while, and finally King Solomon spoke to the women and said, "I think I understand your problem, and I have a solution." So he called for one of his servants. When the servant came, Solomon said, "Go and bring me a big sword, one that is very sharp." And the servant did exactly that. And Solomon said to the two women, "The only way that we can resolve this dispute in a way that's fair and right is for me to cut this child in two and give each of you a half." Well, immediately on hearing that, one of the women protested and said, "Oh, no, King, you cannot do that. Please don't do that. This child has done nothing wrong. Listen, if it means sparing the life of this child, give this child to this other woman." The other woman responded this way, "It doesn't matter to me. Go ahead and cut the child in half. The only thing I'm interested in is making sure that this woman doesn't get the child alive." Well, when Solomon heard both of those responses, he immediately knew who the real mother was. It was the woman who begged him to spare the life of the child. And so Solomon took the child and gave it to that woman. According to the writer of 1 Kings, that's when Solomon's reputation as a wise and insightful king took off. People began to realize that Solomon understood so very much about life and about what was important. So let's see if we can apply this lesson to our lives today. Let's pretend for a moment and imagine that God shows up to you, maybe at home, maybe at school, maybe somewhere on the playground or in the gym, and God says to you, "Hey, ask me whatever you want, anything, and I'll give it." What would you ask for? Would you say, "Hey, God, I'd really love to be 8 feet tall so I could be the biggest and the baddest basketball player ever"? Or would you ask God and say, "Hey, give me really, really good grades so I can get a scholarship and go to this college and I can study whatever it is that you want to study"? Or would you say, "Lord, my family is not doing well, so I wish you'd just give me a lot of money. I would like to have a lot of money"? You see, we could ask all kinds of, if God asked, we could say, "God, please give me all kinds of things." Well, the takeaway from Solomon's life is this. Solomon recognized that the most important thing any of us can have, besides being super athletic or being really smart or having a lot of money, the most important thing is this. It's to be able to live well, to know what it takes to live a good life. Or, as we think of it in terms of Solomon, it's being able to have wisdom, to understand how life works, to understand the difference between good and evil, things that are right and wrong. To be able to live well, to make sure that you can use all of your gifts and all of your potential and live as a good person. Solomon teaches that this is the most important thing any of us can ever have. So I hope that whenever you pray to God, and certainly it's okay for any of us to ask God for whatever we need, but I hope as a part of our prayers, we'll pray for what Solomon asked God for. And that is that we'll pray that God will help us make us wise, that God will show us what we need in order to live well and to be good people. Well, that's our lesson for today. We'll pick up with another lesson from King Solomon's life next week. Again, I want to thank you for joining me, and I certainly hope that the rest of your week goes very, very well. Take care. Goodbye.